May I now request Dr. D. Jeevan Kumar. He is Professor of Political Science at the Bengaluru University. Is it for class? I'm making an unilateral declaration without taking permission from the organizers that after this 10 minutes, we'll have another 10 to 15 minutes. I hope the organizers will permit for the question and answer session. Please.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, sir. I'm grateful to the organizers, in particular Jayashree ji, for selecting my paper and inviting me to make a presentation here. As you can see, I've titled my paper Bridging the Urban Divide, and I'm making in my paper a case for inclusive urbanization. Let me also clarify that since I teach political science, mine is basically a policy science and a political science perspective bringing a political science perspective to this particular conference. My paper is divided into 5 sections. Initially, I look at the urban divide, and there are some hard truths that I would like the audience to take a close look at. Against the background of those hard truths, I place before you a set of hypotheses. I have 5 to 6 hypotheses. I then look at some innovative initiatives for promoting inclusive urbanization. The 4th section asks the question, what is an inclusive city? And I have some answers for to this particular question, and I end my paper with concluding observations. I will take exactly 10 minutes to complete my presentation. What is the urban divide? I'm making this statement: the cities are divided by invisible borders, and the statement that fragmentation of society is very clearly reflected in the way in which space and opportunities are produced, appropriated, transformed, and utilized. Take a look at this particular city and how beautiful it looks at, and how space is organized in this particular city. Please also take a look at what happens in the peripheries of many of our cities. And this contrast will perhaps help us to understand how we are planning and developing our cities. A few hard truths regarding the urban divide, how these cities exacerbate inequalities, and how when income inequalities intersect with other inequalities, be they social, legal, spatial, cultural, political, and environmental, how this intersection reinforces deprivation and how they become causes for even further inequalities. Economic inequality closely linked with spatial and gender inequality, and how this leads to the exclusion, criminalization of vulnerable groups. And they indicated there slum dwellers. Particularly, there was a police commissioner in Bangalore, the city where I come from, who said that on one particular occasion that slums harbor criminals. A huge statement, and there was hard action taken against slum dwellers, and this was his perception, a police commissioner's perception, generalizing all slum dwellers as criminals. If you take a look at the problems of women in any of those groups that are identified there, they face double discrimination because they're also facing gender-based discrimination. I have I'm making a particular focus on migrant laborers in Bangalore. Already, I think 30 to 40% of people in Bangalore are localites, belong to Karnataka. Most of the people living in Bangalore right now are outsiders. A good share of the people who come from outside to Bangalore are migrant laborers, and their position, to put it very mildly, is simply pathetic. We have Bangalore Metro, which is coming up in a huge way, and in a couple of years, I think Bangalore would be connected by the Metro. But if you look at the plight of these workers in Bangalore Metro, simply pathetic. If you take a look at women existing below the poverty line, especially those living in slums, the kind of work that they are exposed to, again, very pathetic. In the mornings when I used to drop my daughter to work, we stay in the outskirts of Bangalore, Mysore Road, a whole lot of garment factories located in the outskirts of Bangalore, especially on Mysore Road. And my daughter would ask me, why are these women rushing to work, most of them not even wearing slippers, not even wearing footwear, And when you pass the factory, it becomes very obvious that only the first few hundreds who can make it on time are the ones who have work for that particular day. Those who come after the bell goes, cross the line, are told, well, today we have the number of workers that we require to work, you please come tomorrow. The pathetic situation that women face, especially in garment factories, the impact of such inequities in health is something that we're probably familiar with. A significant challenge is the rise of discrimination and racism in cities like Bangalore, xenophobia, intolerance perpetrated against people, a good lot of people in Bangalore now coming from the Northeast, and the way in which we treat people in Northeast hit the headlines a few years ago, probably just a couple of years ago, when the whole city seemed to have given the message to people from the Northeast, you are unwanted here, we don't want you here. And there was a huge rush and exodus of people from the Northeast wanting to get out of Bangalore. Just take a close look at this visual, and the boy sitting at the right-hand corner of this visual. Which city it is not important. All of them are looking outward, probably towards, it's probably a bus shelter, waiting for a bus to come. And just look at the plight of this excluded little person sitting there. Even if the bus comes and he wants to get into the bus, do you think he would be allowed into a bus? He's one of the people that I am looking at whose numbers are multiplying in cities thanks to the urban divide. This slide is taking a look at factors which are further driving exclusion in cities. A policy focus on economic growth at the expense of inclusion, high competition between cities for investments. We have something which I describe as the politics of competitive investment, where you have FDI coming into cities, we have TNCs wanting to establish basin cities, but they have the conditions very clear. We will invest, we will develop your city, but we don't want rules to apply, we don't want labor laws to apply, we don't want them to unionize. Are you willing to allow us into your city? And city governments are saying, yes, you're most welcome, minus these rules. So we have these special zones where cities, where you have investment coming into cities, and at what expense is the question. Commodification of land is another big issue. The environmental threats to cities, including climate change, where the first victims of climate change are the poor, and also look at extreme power, resource imbalance, and access to governance, access to decision making. Now all of these factors are exacerbating further exclusion. I have a few points which I'd like this conference to ponder over. I think the issue before us is very simple. Do we accept this reality as inevitable, brush the urban divide under the carpet, and carry on as if nothing is happening? Or do we acknowledge the potential of the urban divide to literally blow up our cities? I'm clear that the urban divide is a time bomb waiting to explode our cities. What are the active ingredients of this time bomb? Deprivation, exclusion, exploitation, corruption, misery, frustration, despondency, hopelessness, anger. You see it all very much visible in the cities. All it needs is a little spark to explode. I was driving a scholar from Germany who had come to Bangalore and who said he wants to look at certain parts of Bangalore where normally foreigners do not go to. So I said, I will take you to the city market area. There are traffic lights in city market area, but as you know, traffic lights, people respect traffic lights only when there are no policemen. I think you know this observation. When traffic lights first came into cities, urban bodies said, we can spare our policemen from regulating traffic because people would respect those signals, and so on and so forth. We can put them to more important tasks like managing VIP movement and all that. But if you take a look at cities today and whether people respect traffic lights, it reminds me of another observation somebody made, that we are all gentlemen because of policemen. So you need traffic lights, and you need policemen at traffic lights to ensure that people respect that. So I was telling the German gentleman who had come to Bangalore, took him to City Market, and he was saying, my goodness, there are lights, but nobody's respecting the lights. And through the maze of City Market, there were people, laborers carrying heavy loads, vegetables on their heads, trying to maneuver in between traffic. and desperately keeping themselves safe to cross over to the other side. And he was saying, I think I have amazing respect for the resilience of the average Indian and the way in which they're able to tolerate this kind of a mess from the poor person's perspective. I told him at that point of time, if any of the vehicles that we are driving happens to knock down any of those laborers, that would be a spark which would explode, and so on and so forth. I'm reminded of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's speech of 25th November 1949, where he asks a few important questions. How long will people tolerate the absence of equality in society? Political democracy minus social democracy is a recipe for disaster. And if we deny equality to the masses for too long, they will blow up the structure we have created in this constitution. I come to my set of hypotheses. Inclusive urbanization, I think, is the answer to the setting up of integrated, cohesive, harmonious, peaceful, and stable societies. Inclusive urbanization provides a powerful potential for social mobilization, for giving freedom of expression for the marginalized, for the excluded. Inclusive urbanization that recognizes urban cultural diversity can deconstruct social norms, gender stereotypes, obsolete traditions, customs. Inclusive urbanization can facilitate strong networks to empower the disempowered. Inclusive urbanization is extremely invaluable because it promotes diversity, belonging, connectedness, and I think this is extremely important to combat disillusionment, radicalizations, particularly of young people, which are seeing happening in many other parts of the world in cities. And this is my last hypothesis. Well-managed, inclusive cities can promote a model of urbanization that upholds the rights of every inhabitant. Even if he's a child, even if he is located in a slum, can we have inclusive urbanization that says, that protects the rights of the child, be it to education, be it to food, be it to safety, be it to security? I present before you, ladies and gentlemen, a few innovative initiatives. I'll quickly run through this. UNESCO in 2004, 2 minutes, sir?
Half a minute.
Half a minute, okay. I'll just run through this. There are a few initiatives that are happening around the world. I'm flagging this in my paper. I don't have time to go into this. I asked the question then, what is an inclusive city? Should it look like this? I'm not very sure. An inclusive city should speak of social inclusion, and I have points here which mention what is social inclusion. An inclusive city should talk of political inclusion. I have a couple of points here which explain that. An inclusive city should talk of make provisions for economic inclusion, and I'm explaining here what it means. An inclusive city must have cultural inclusion, and I'm placing before you what it means. A few of my concluding observations. Urbanization processes should be firmly entrenched in a human rights framework. There should be clear accountability of local bodies and governments. Decisions and processes in cities need to be transparent, with information available to everyone, subjected to public scrutiny, buttressed by free and fair dispute redressal mechanisms. The hitherto excluded marginalized city dwellers need to be suitably empowered so that their voices can be heard and included in the urbanization project. Fostering inclusive social innovation processes can build partnerships among stakeholders. Focusing attention to migrant population is crucial, and we have to take care of, remove all the restrictions that we are normally currently placing before migrant population. These are a few of my references and a few slides about cities, how they're growing across the world. This is Lima in Peru, Nairobi, Kenya, Seoul, South Korea. But if you take a look at the underbelly of many of the cities, this is what we would find in Jakarta, Indonesia. At least this child has a mother who is cooking something for him. But what would you say about this girl in one part of the world whose back is turned to us? And what I'm basically trying to say in my paper is, if we don't address the urban divide at the earliest, we are turning our backs on a lot of the urban poor and the future generation. At what cost can we turn our backs on the urban poor? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Professor Jeevan Kumar. Inclusive urbanization is, I think, the most appropriate word to end the presentations in this technical session, because it really summarizes most of our concerns with regard to the trends and patterns of urbanization in the country. I would open up all the presentations for questions, answers. Make it quick so that we have time for the panelists to respond. Yes, please. Yep.
None of the speakers represented population control policy. I visited many of the cities, one from Florida, I think, the inclusive urbanization, or inclusive growth. It doesn't refer to the population control policy. China's.
So can you
sorry to say
hard?
that in this session, it's a very interesting session. I've enjoyed it. But none of the speakers has mentioned population control policy. China succeeded. They have evidence to say, have concrete evidence from the Communist Party source. I can show it, not write down, if you give some time. Even Mao Zedong reluctantly accepted the policy, which they actually started from the mid-60s. The exact year is 1966. They adopted the policy of, first of all, 2 children, then 1 child policy, which has been vigorously criticized by some progressive economists. Quite a few of them are personally known to me. I don't want to mention the names. They vigorously attacked. And I don't think that our ruling party, given the present political political environment, has got the political will to recommend any population control policy. And that is the main thing. Nobody has mentioned it. And migration is another point. So why do people migrate from the rural to the urban areas? Why do people? There is no theoretical model. HT model provides no explanation to the migration problem. We are happy. HT model is not. I think some papers will be presented tomorrow on HT model. HT model is not at all an explanation for migration. Why do people? And situation varies from one city to the other city. What about the smart cities? I think, if I'm not wrong,
This will be the
someone
last
has-
comment on this. You have to stop after this. Please go ahead and complete this.
anyway, I can't. My memory is very poor, maybe due to my age. One thing, how do you relate smart cities to property price? Bombay doesn't look like a very smart city. I have been in Bombay for a few years, and I visited Bombay several times. Bombay is a smart city, is not at all a smart city. I don't mean to say that, but property price is extraordinarily high. Bombay is not very far from New York in terms of property price. And not only that, you'll be surprised to know that even in some small cities, towns, not cities, actually I spent 3 months 2 or 3 months in my hometown, which is located in Baharampur, Murshidabad district. You'll be surprised to know the average land price per 720 square feet is not less than 20 lakhs. It's not less than 20 lakhs. Even in the slum area, you'll be surprised to know the price is 1 lakh. Or they will simply grant occupancy right. So reality is quite different from what you're talking about.
I think this is an important issue which will also
Yeah,
come
yeah.
up
That is not
in our
very
session on urban land,
Okay.
right? Okay. Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Yes, please. Professor Agarwal.
Well, I will say something about smart cities. Well, I definitely agree with your pessimism about India, that this model probably cannot be replicated. Now, I will just address that which you probably could not, to add to this. The whole idea of smart cities in the Western context, which we are trying to replicate, was on urban sprawl, because that was the major issue in the Western world. And so they thought that how we can discipline the city, and this whole idea of greenfield development came, in which the green spaces within the city and a kind of green belt that the cities could not expand, and then within the city how we increase the efficiency of the city system. That was the whole idea. But I find that in Indian context, somehow, if you look at this all brown field question which are being addressed, not the greenfield issues, which are very, very starkly important to be addressed. Then I say that why we should use the word smart city. We could use some alternative, because city is not, the whole city is not smart. It's giving it a wrong message. I will say that probably we can say smart growth and or sustainable city, which could be more inclusive and resources consumption, efficiency, and etc. So I am somehow with this terminology, I'm not very much happy to call it smart city. We could consider. Third, I have looked at some of the, let us agree that whatever the government of India, 100 smart cities and 1 lakh crore going for it, and in 5 years and 3 phases and so on. But in the first phase itself, it has failed. If we want to make the city inclusive, because each city was expected to create a website on which people could give their views, what they want. First, it was inaccessible that those who have a telephone or a web connection can only give on the Facebook or something. So it means you are already at that stage excluding certain group of people who can't give their opinion into the system. And then based upon that, the cities will be selected. So I think the bias is already built into the system. So this is my, I will say that a concept of capacity building would have been more appropriate, or strengthening the already existing GNRM program, which was more focused on the infrastructure building, would have given more, you can say, financial efficiency, as you already mentioned that there is not enough money. But if we had strengthened the earlier existing program on infrastructure strengthening, probably it could have delivered better result. So these are my just observations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I am again talking about this smart cities. Well, if we look into the present situation and if we go through the situations like Chennai, earlier Bombay, and every monsoon, if you just look at Gurgaon and other things, I mean, I don't see a reason why to go for smart cities, when we cannot improve upon the existing ones. And this happens every year, and every year it happens, we forget, and then again we move on. I don't know. And then the cities like Delhi, even, this MCD is starving for funds, So if we can't make our capital even smart, then what to talk of other cities? And then secondly, see, what I find is that, instead of this smart cities, why not